Good evening and welcome. I'm Emily Ponchel, Public Programs Manager here at the Newberry. Thank you for joining us for Made in Chicago, Stories Behind 30 Great Hometown Bites. Meet the authors Monica Eng and David Hammond. And I have to start out with a really quick disclaimer. If you haven't eaten yet, this program is going to make you really hungry, so hopefully the Garretts will tide you over if you hadn't had your dinner yet. The Newberry Library supports and inspires research, teaching, and learning in the humanities. Since our founding in 1887, the Newberry has remained dedicated to deepening our collective understanding of ourselves and the world around us. We connect researchers and visitors with our collection in the Newberry's reading rooms, exhibition galleries, program spaces, classrooms, and online digital resources. And of course, programs like this one are free and open to the public thanks to the generosity of our community of donors, all of you. So please consider making a gift to the Newberry today at newberry.org/give. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speakers this evening. Monica Eng is a reporter for Axios Chicago and co-host of the podcast Chewing. She has worked as a food, culture, and investigative reporter at WBEZ Chicago Public Radio and at the Chicago Tribune, where she was nominated for 5 James Beard Awards for writing. You can clap, yes, clap. And David Hammond is dining and drinking editor for New City Chicago magazine. He regularly writes on food and drink related topics for Wednesday Journal and the Chicago Tribune, and is a founding member moderator of LTHforum.com, a site celebrating Chicago's mom and pop restaurants. Please join me in welcoming Monica Eng and David Hammond. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Emily. And Emily was great. She told us we need to hold the mic like Celine Dion if we want to be heard. So I'm going to have it right angles to my face. All right, well, thanks so much for coming out on this gorgeous night. We're so happy to be here, and we got 45 minutes to tell you a little bit about the book, go through 30 foods, and launch a contest that will give some lucky winners out here who are adventurous eaters some really great prizes. So make sure you've got one of these, and if you've got a pencil, you might want to circle all of the ones that you have eaten because, again, you might get a prize. But first off, Dave, you have a little history with the Newberry, especially from when you were in grad school.
I do. When I was in graduate school, I would come to the Newberry on Saturdays to read first editions of Renaissance texts. And so to be here as a presenter is a tremendous honor for me. And thank you all for coming out tonight. How am I holding the mic? Is that okay?
That's a great job. And, actually, we found out that we both had minors in Renaissance drama. And here we are writing about dumb food. Anyway, no, we're writing about great food. So a lot of people ask us, how did we get this idea to even write this book? For me, I'd been researching a lot of these books for the Sun-Times, for the Tribune, and for WBEZ. And I was having lunch one day with a friend who's a hot dog historian, which is a great job. His name is Bruce Craig. He's written 2 books on hot dog histories. And he said, why don't you put these all in a book? And I said, I'd love to, but I can't even remember to wash my hair. I'm trying to make my deadlines. I'm trying to take care of my kids and be a good mom and partner. There's no way I could write a book for an academic press. But then I saw Dave at a book party, and I told him about this, and what'd you say?
I said yes.
Why don't we do it together? Yeah.
I was excited about investigating the foods that I've been eating all my life in Chicago. I think the first food I ever bought from a street vendor was a Chicago corn roll tamale, which is actually one of my least favorite of the 30 foods we're doing. But it is a classic Chicago invention, and it's found in the mother-in-law, which we're going to be talking about in just a moment.
Who's had a corn roll tamale? Or tamale. All right. So we got old Chicagoans. So a lot of people ask us, how did we even decide these 30 dishes? Like, what were the criteria? And it was basically that they had to be served in Chicago restaurants. It's at least a version of it invented here. They had to have a great story, and what else?
Had to be served at more than one place because we didn't want to do just restaurant specials because that would go into the tens of thousands of dishes. It wouldn't be that interesting. We chose dishes that could be found at several locations and thus would perhaps be actually reflective of Chicago culture. And we think a lot of these dishes are, that they show the influence of different immigrant groups that came to the United States and different epochs in Chicago history.
They basically tell the history of 20th century Chicago in a very delicious way. So let's get started on number one. Oh, yes, that's mine. All right, who's had this? Raise your hand. All right, it's the Jibarito. So in 1996, there was a gentleman named Juan C. Figueroa at a restaurant called Borinquen in Humboldt Park, who was basically waiting to close his third disastrous business. His dad brought him over here from Puerto Rico and bankrolled a liquor store and then a convenience store. And so then he had this Puerto Rican restaurant called Borinquen that nobody was going to. And I'm part Puerto Rican, so I'm sort of allowed to do his accent. He said, so Monica was there one morning reading El Vocero newspaper, and I see the recipe for something called sanguich de plátano. And that's a plantain sandwich. So the plantains are like big starchy bananas. If you fry them when they're green, it's like a big nutty French fry. So basically it uses big tostones, which is what we call them when you fry them in discs, as your bread. And he made it, and his dad told him to put it on the menu. When his dad came back from his vacation to Puerto Rico that year, there were lines out the door. There were Dominican and Puerto Rican players on the Sox and visiting teams who heard about it, and competitors were coming in and spying on him. And next thing you knew, there were dozens of places in Chicago and other states that serve the Jibarito. So that, I would say, is my favorite Chicago food that is still around today. All right, next.
The mother-in-law, a sandwich with a very odd name. It's a Chicago corn roll tamale, which is not like a tamale you'd find in Mexico. It's a tamale that's been made by a machine rather than little Hispanic ants in the back room. It's extruded, cut into slices. You've probably had them. Supreme and Tom Tom are the two main companies that make them. In the mother-in-law, you have this corn roll tamale placed into a sesame seed bun, much like a Chicago hot dog, with chili on top, and then some Chicago hot dog condiments like the sport peppers and the chopped onions. Now, the name mother-in-law needs some explanation, and I'm going to pass it to you in a moment, Monica. When I was in Mexico City, I usually go to the Witches Market, which is part of Mercado de Sonora. You can go there to get amulets and trinkets and even have your soul cleansed by a chicken, or for a lesser price, an egg. I'm not kidding about that. Now, outside there, they were selling, there's a long line in front of a little concession stand. So I thought, well, that must be something good. I'll get in line. I didn't know what it was. It turned out to be a tamale in a bolillo, which is like a Mexican bun, much like the mother-in-law. Now, there is a sauce. It was in a green sauce, too, and I kind of ate it down and didn't pay much attention to the sauce. But there is a salsa in Mexico called salsa de suegra, which means mother-in-law sauce. Connection? Possibly. Or there might be another reason for the name. Monica?
Well, the story you heard is that, like the mother-in-law, it
can give you indigestion, yes.
Oh, all right.
Apologies to mother-in-laws.
Okay,
everywhere.
so that's, and you can read the full story in our book about, has anyone ever been to this stand, Fat Johnny's? All right, it's probably one of the best places to get the mother-in-law. All right, who knew the pizza puff was invented in Chicago? All right. Okay. Well, you'll learn more about it in the book. I found this a super fascinating story. It was an Assyrian an Assyrian immigrant at the turn of the century who left Iran and came to Chicago. And at that time, the way they sold hot dogs in Chicago were through push carts. And this guy had a business where he took old baby buggies and he put sternos in them and turned them into hot dog push carts. And then each week he would go to his clients and say, okay, I'm going to collect my money for the rental of this equipment. One day he came to a home and the wife said, I can't give you any money. My husband's died. All I have are these magic beans. Okay, now, not magic beans, actually a magic recipe for corn roll tamales. So he took that and he started what's called Il Taco, the Illinois Tamale Company. And he sold corn roll tamales along with renting the hot dog equipment. And his son Warren took over the business, Warren Shabazz, and he was delivering hot dog equipment to now actual buildings that were selling hot dogs. And they had something called fryers. And they said, Warren, can you help us out? We're getting killed by this new thing called the pizzeria. If you could give us something that could help hot dog stands compete with the pizzeria, it would be great. So they started goofing around in their factory with flour tortillas and some cheese and some tomato sauce. And he said, once we perfected it so it wouldn't explode in their fryer, we were in business. And now Il Taco's biggest product is the pizza puff. And to this day, it's still just a flour tortilla that they actually started making themselves. They were getting them from tortillerias until Warren said, until they were like, look, we cannot handle your volume anymore. You got to start making your own tortillas. And on the South Side, the big thing to eat it with is mild sauce. You get your pizza puff smothered in mild sauce. And I had my first one in writing this book. I can't believe it.
I did too. And I was confusing them with pizza puffs.
Like Totino's stuff. Yeah, those little...
Which they're not. They're way different, better, I think.
Yeah. All right, let's go on the next one. Who's had this? Admit it.
I thought so.
Walk of shame.
Malort is a very unusual product in a lot of ways, not the least of which is that it's marketed based on its repulsiveness. There may not be I can't think of another market in the history of, or another product in the history of commerce that was marketed based on its disagreeability.
I thought that was supposed to be our marketing scheme for the book.
Malort, if you haven't had it, is a type of, it's kind of like an Italian Amaro or a burnt wine. It's a spirit, of course, and it has wormwood in it. It's wormwood forward. And in fact, Malort is the Swedish word for wormwood. And wormwood is just a bittering herb. It's a key ingredient in absinthe, and it's actually why absinthe was forbidden to be sold in Europe and the United States until relatively recently. It's because, I think it was sometime in the 20s, a Frenchman, Jean Lafay, allegedly drank a lot of absinthe, went mad, killed his family. And so on the basis of that one incident, it was decided that absinthe would be denied, wouldn't you be able to buy Malort. Now, absinthe. Malort is, I think it's because of the name. I mean, malort, it sounds like malfeasance or malevolent or malodorous or something like that. It sounds bad. It's become kind of an inside joke among Chicagoans. The joke is when an out-of-towner comes out with you, you ask them, hey, can I buy you a shot of Chicago's favorite spirit, Malort? The innocent visitor might say yes. They get their shot, they drink it, and then they make what is called Malort face, which is the kind of a scrunched up expression from drinking this very bitter spirit. And in fact, if you go on Instagram and search hashtag Malort face, you'll see all the faces that have been cataloged as unfortunate victims of this beverage. Now, it was bought by CH Distillery some years ago. It was made in the United States since like 1917, delivered door to door by this guy, Carl Jepsen. And then over the years, ownership passed around until finally it's made in Chicago. And the CH Distillery has tweaked the recipe just a little bit. They actually went to Sweden, to the same place that Carl Jepsen got his wormwood, and are using that in Malort now. And I got this the other day. I think this is very funny. It's croutons. A Chicago handshake is a Malort chased by an old style, which for some which is not a bad idea. If you have a sip of Malort, you're going to want something to wash it back. These are croutons flavored with Malort and Old Style. It's a kind of a gag gift. Now, these are kind of expensive too, like $30 a can, but all the proceeds go to the Chicago Food Depository, and it's kind of an inside Chicago joke, and I think that's what Malort is. It's kind of an inside joke. And I'll finish up here, but a few years ago, Malort, or CH Distillery, tried to crowdsource some slogans for Malort, and some of the ones that were contributed were, Malort, when you want to unfriend someone in person, and Malort, tonight's the night you fight your dad. It's kind of a joke, but as Tremaine Atkinson, the owner of CH Distillery, told me, he said, people talk about Malort and have all these terrible stories about it, but when they're retelling these stories, there's always a certain joy in it. And it doesn't hurt anybody, at least we found that out now, thanks to science. And it's just a fun thing. And I have a bottle at home, and I do treat out-of-town visitors to it, and they almost unfailingly do the Malort face, which I find very pleasing.
And former WGN radio host Nick D says that the key is you have it 3 times, and on your 4th time you love it, and not even in one night.
You've only had it once. So.
Yeah, I've got a few more times. All right, has anyone ever heard of Akutagawa? Oh, it separates the wheat from the chaff. I don't want to say men from the boys. Okay, so this is a dish first served at a restaurant called Hamburger King in Wrigleyville, 2 doors down from the Nisei Lounge. And so in the 1960s or 70s, it's still unclear, there was a customer named George Akutagawa who used to like to drink in the Nisei Lounge and then go next door to the Hamburger King and ask his buddy, Joe Yamauchi, to please make him a dish where he chopped up hamburger, chopped up some green peppers, some onions, some bean sprouts, and then cracked a few eggs over it and served it always with a side of rice and gravy. When we were researching this, I found out that George Akutagawa was actually a Hawaiian Japanese who came to Chicago, and there they have a dish. What is it called again?
Loco Moco?
Loco Moco, which is actually fairly similar to this. But a lot of the Japanese immigrants who came to Chicago post-World War II were forcibly resettled here after being forcibly interned. They were told, you can't go back to California, and you should not be congregating together, and for your own good, you should stop acting Japanese. I felt like this was a dish that they sort of said, okay, the place is called Hamburger King, but we're going to make something that is somewhat Japanese that can sort of have some sort of link to our heritage. And so to this day, Akutagawa is still served where Hamburger King was. It was bought and now called Rice and Bread. And it's served at least at 2 other diners, Susie's and the Fullerton Diner. And this sort of relic of Japanese Americanness still survives today in a dish that's actually not half bad. Now at Rice and Bread, they serve it with a side of kimchi, which I think really kind of perks it up. All right, what's this, David?
Well, this is something I hadn't had before I started writing this book, and I'm curious, has anyone here had Taffy Grapes? Impressive that anyone has. May I ask, where did you purchase them? Harold's? I figured. Yeah, it's Harold's and the Baba's Steak and Lemonade places that are along like Madison and Chicago.
Some Nickies, too.
Pardon me?
Some Nickies have them, too.
Nickies. They're so super simple, and I think it's the shortest chapter in the book because there's just not a lot to say about it, but I really like them, and what they are, fresh green grapes dipped in usually white chocolate or white frosting, and then sprinkled with nuts. And they're served at places like Harold's, usually near the front counter, kind of an impulse purchase as people are leaving. It's something kind of you can have for dessert, and it's probably the healthiest thing you'll find on the menu at places like Harold's. And it's really good. And I think the name, I haven't found any basis for this, but I believe the name, they call them Taffy Grapes because they're kind of like taffy apples. That is, they're a fruit covered in something sweet, like white chocolate, and then sprinkled with nuts. So that's they're like $5 for a little plastic clamshell container. And I think and they're also super easy to make at home. We made a few dozen at home one day. I mean, You dip them in chocolate, you sprinkle them with nuts, and they're done. And they're really quite tasty.
All right. I ran into someone who told me that it was an ancient Palestinian dish, and that's why they served it. But I met another guy who claims he invented them to make them like a taffy apple. So we had to contend with a few different sort of stories that we if we couldn't verify, we didn't really put them in, or we just said they said. All right, so those are the ones we're going to give you a bit more about, but keep these in mind. You also have them on paper. We're going to do a little quiz now. We're going to show you the picture, and you have to tell us what the food is. All right, rib tips. Okay, who's had it? All right.
Everyone. And please keep track of how many you've had on the list. You have the list in front of you
Maybe
there.
tick off the ones you haven't had, because that might be easier.
That might be easier, yeah.
So the super short story on rib tips is in the 1950s. This is the earliest one I can find. The Lemon brothers, Miles Lemons, came from Mississippi, and he had a barbecue shop, and they just, to make a nice slab, they would cut off these gnarly bits at the bottom of a St. Louis rack, and they'd feed them to the staff. But the staff were like, "These are great." So they started serving it to the public, and it became a big Chicago thing, smoked and tenderized in an aquarium smoker. All right, so rib tips, you got it. And oh, yeah, I was going to say, what are they often served with? Hot links. That's why if you subscribe to the Axios newsletter, Axios Chicago, we have an area where we put like other stories you should read. We call it tips and links. Get it? See? Okay, anybody know what this is? Yeah, it's like, is it Italian beef or just giardiniera? It's both Chicago inventions. Steve, you want to say a bit about it?
Yeah, there's a, this was one of my chapters. We had the good fortune to interview Chris Pacelli, who's the owner of Al's Beef. A great guy to talk to, through and through, a Chicagoan. And he gave me this one paragraph explanation. He went on for like an hour and a half, but there's this one paragraph explanation of the genesis of the Italian beef sandwich. Now, I'm an Italian American, and so no apologies to any Italian Americans who might find offense in these words. Al's Italian American too. You got to remember, Italians in the 1930s and 20s, there were all kinds of gamblers, half-assed mafia guys and stuff. My Uncle Al was involved in all of that, a gambler, this, that. Well, he gets into trouble and has to go to jail and starts driving a truck. A friend says, let's open up a bookie joint. So my uncle says, why don't I do beef sandwiches? I'll sell them as a front. There were like 5 guys. The original beef stand was on Laughlin and Harrison. They didn't have gas or nothing in those days, so everything was charcoal. First name for the idea was Al's Barbecue. Now, Pacelli went on to say that most major Italian beef stands in Chicago started as fronts for gambling operations. I cannot, certify that, but that's what he said. And it seems to have been true in the case of Al's, which I still think has one of the best beef sandwiches in Chicago. And if you've had an Italian beef, or if you've been a Chicagoan for a while, the likelihood is high that you enjoy your beefs at Al. And they have their own special giardiniera, too, heavy on the celery and peppers.
Yeah, you can tell this is not Al's because Al's does not have those serrano peppers. It's all celery. He said because he got tired of cutting peppers as a kid, so he said, we're just going to put red pepper flakes. All right, Italian beef, yeah, you got it. Okay, anybody have any idea what this sandwich is? Well, there's definitely gyros in it.
Partly true.
Who said the gym shoe? Yes, it is the gym shoe. Which is Italian beef, corned beef, and gyros, sometimes layered. That was the original, sort of room temperature. And then the later one, when Pakistani owners ended up buying a lot of these sub shops on the south side, they started making a griddled version where you chopped it up, you put it on the griddle with onions and the giardiniera, and then you chopped it up, and it sounded like which mimicked the sound and a technique of something in Karachi called katakat. But in katakat cooking, it's not corned beef, Italian beef, and gyros. It is lungs, hearts, stomachs, and intestines, and brains. So this is sort of the milder version of it. But the gentleman I interviewed, he said that he actually uses cut spices when he makes his. And we were able to explore a lot of theories about where the Jimshu came from, including one where a Jordanian guy said that this guy came through my drive-through high on weed at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he said, give me something with 3 meats. And he said, how about if I give you a Jimshu with a 3 meat on it? And he said, yeah, sure, man. And I checked it out, and I was like, well, what year did that happen? He said 2007, but there were credible sightings in 1980s, so it couldn't have been, but it's a great story, and it would have been great to go with. So this is something you almost exclusively find on the South Side, in sub shops, like Stony Sub, like why am I blanking? South Shore Sub. In the book, we have all the places to get them, and it's if you're very lucky, you get a super crispy Jimshu, all wrapped in a giant burrito flour tortilla, sealed, lowered gently into oil, and deep fried, like the biggest egg roll you've ever seen.
We do include at the end of every chapter places you can get the foods listed in the book, because we hope this book is used as kind of a guide to Chicago or an incentive to maybe travel to parts of the city you haven't been to before.
Yep. All right, you got to know this one. Right. Specifically a Maxwell Street Polish.
This remains the bestseller at Jim's Original, which used to be right at the corner of Halsted and Maxwell in the old Maxwell Street Market. And it's likely the proximity of the Maxwell Street Market to the Union stockyards that meant that there were a lot of beef and pork scraps left that could be turned into sausage. I think it's a great sandwich. I mean, and I think part of that greatness is because it sits on the griddle for a long period of time, sizzling along with the onions. I mean, you can't get within 50 yards of Jim's Original without smelling the onions, and it's a great sandwich.
I met a Polish gentleman on a train in France recently who said, your Polish sausage isn't anything like we have in Poland. They're like, okay, but it's good.
And this is one of those dishes, too, that maybe was invented before it was ever served at Jim's Original, because I know they have a lot of sausage in Poland, and probably some buns, too.
And Macedonians run the place.
Pardon me?
The Jim's Original folks, they're originally Macedonians.
Yes.
Okay, I think I gave this one away. What is on top of this chicken? Mild sauce. Wow. If we have more time, I'd tell you about the guy at Uncle Remus Fried Chicken who probably made the first proprietary blend, but we were not able to find out who made the actual first one. The best theory was when people were getting fried foods in Chicago, the guy behind the counter would say, you want hot sauce or you want ketchup? And they'd be like, you got something like mild sauce? And so they mixed the two. Because a lot of it tastes like you mix Louisiana hot sauce with ketchup, but people claim, no, it's so much more than that. All right, yay, okay, we're gonna go fast. Okay, are you guys eating this? Okay, right.
We call it Chicago mix, just like we call Willett's Tower Sears Tower, but Garrett's can no longer call their mixture of cheese and caramel popcorn Chicago mix, because a company in Minnesota, Candyland, bought the trademark and now forbids anyone else to use that name, which is their right to do. They bought the trademark. It was kind of careless of Garrett's not to have bought that mark or paid for that mark earlier on. This, incidentally, may very well have been invented or popularized by Gene Siskel. We found an article in the Tribune from 1985 I think it was in the context of a Siskel movie review, and he was saying, now, I usually bring my popcorn to the theater, and this is going to sound really disgusting. If you go to Garrett's, I saw a guy do this the other day, get a mix of the caramel corn and the cheddar cheese corn and mix them together. Now that's the first, it wasn't called Chicago mix. It wasn't called anything. It was something you made yourself by combining the ingredients you bought. But now it has to be called Garrett's mix everywhere that Garrett's is located. And if someone else is selling the same combination, can't call it Chicago mix.
Maybe we should just start calling it Siskel mix. There we go. All right, anybody have any idea what this is? Okay, it's well, most people don't call it by its Korean name, but it's a gampongi, which just means I think 6-piece chicken or spicy garlicky chicken. And I didn't know I'd been eating it for years, and I didn't know that it was invented in the 1980s on Lawrence Avenue in two ethnically Chinese Korean kitchens. I'll give you like the super short history. Northern Chinese from the Shandong region had to deal with a lot of droughts, so a lot of them moved to Korea. One of the only jobs they could get in Korea, or they were allowed to do, was restaurants. So they created all these Chinese restaurants for Koreans. When they left Korea and came to the United States, they opened these same restaurants that are often frequented by Koreans. So you'll be like, why is there kimchi at the supposedly Chinese restaurant? Why is everybody Korean? And they made this dish that was normally a dish where you use a whole chicken and chop it up. But they came to America and they're like, why are wings so cheap? This is the 80s, before the wing explosion. And they said, they're selling for nothing. So let's just make our dish entirely of wings because they're delicious. The Asians have always prized them, and they're really, really cheap. Now, pound for pound, they're the most expensive cut on a chicken. Back then, that wasn't the case. And they applied the same sort of garlic and spice and actually kind of sauced it up. And now there are several places all over the world, but especially on Lawrence Avenue, that serve this gampong chicken wing. And they lollipop Frenched them because it made them easier to eat. I still find them super messy to eat, but delicious. All right, who knows what this is? There should be flames going up.
Probably a dish many of you have had, but probably only in Chicago if it's flaming. They do not flame it regularly in Greece. However, I strongly suspect that it may be making its way back from Chicago to Greece, and they may have to serve it there just to please visitors from Chicago. There is his name, Louis Katsintzakis, I believe his name is. He owns the Avli restaurants, Avli on the Park, Avli in Winnetka. He started serving his saganaki unflamed. He puts a very delicious little tomato jam on top. However, he said in his Winnetka location, the people demand it to be flamed, and they're kind of disappointed if it's not flamed, and I totally get that, because part of going to a Greek restaurant is having him carry out the flaming cheese, shout opa, everybody claps, and you eat your cheese. Those have been pre-cooked, of course, so I'm not sure how much the flaming actually does for it. Maybe the ouzo or the brandy they put on top adds a little additional flavor. But it's a Chicago thing. And did it start at the Parthenon or Diana's? Well, there's some great stories about Diana's, but I strongly suspect it began in the Parthenon.
We talked to one server who said she would always try to get her customers to not order it because she hated doing the flame thing. She was always afraid it was going to set her hair on fire. All right. Okay. Okay, gyros. I won't even. Okay. How do you say it? Okay, who says gyros? Clap. All right. Who says gyro? Nobody will admit to that. Okay, if we were on the south side, it would be 100% gyro. And tzatziki is gyro sauce. I did a forum with all the mayoral candidates, most of whom were African American, and I asked them what they called it. Sophia King said, "Oh, I said gyros," and Jay Malgreen's like, "Don't lie, no, we don't say gyros." And but if you try to order it on the south side and don't say gyro, you just go hungry. So, all right, who knows what this is? Right.
This is an instance of a food that was first served in Chicago. Now, whether a dish like this was made in other parts of the world, I think there's a high likelihood that it probably was. It probably occurred to someone, we could bake this chicken with potatoes and add a little wine and oregano, and that might be pretty good. However, it's on the menu at Vesuvio's restaurant, which used to be on Wacker Drive in Chicago, and now it's all over. I see it all over the country and all over the world, Vesuvio dishes. It's kind of like Dijon dishes. There's chicken Vesuvio, lamb Vesuvio, and so on. It's a great flavor combination.
Okay, we don't even need to go through this one, right? All right. Okay, the Chicago-style hot dog, and if you read the book, you find out how it really reflects early 20th century immigration to the Maxwell Street area. I'd break down every single ingredient and tell you where it came from with the help of hot dog historian Bruce Craig.
It's a beloved Chicago food, I think. Is there anybody here, and you won't be ostracized, who doesn't like a Chicago hot dog? Aha! What? Oh, very good.
Right.
What? Just curious. What is it you don't like about it? Fair enough.
Okay.
Oh, you guys.
Oh boy. Which one? Oh, nice. All right. Well, I think we've talked about corn roll tamale.
Chicago corn roll tamale. We talked briefly about these. They're. I tell you, I'm constantly researching, and I found a very good rendition of a Chicago hot dog. Excuse me, a Chicago corn roll tamale at Portillo's. They do a version that a custom version. It's much thicker, much softer, and there's a much better ratio of that meat, allegedly meat stuff in the center, and the cornmeal on the outside. A problem with them that I found at places like Johnny's Beef or hot dog stands is that they don't sell very well. I think the main reason for their existence is they fill up. If you go into an Italian beef place, they fill up that little extra belly real estate that hasn't been occupied by the Italian beef, and so it's a little something more to eat, just to kind of fill out your tummy space. But because it doesn't sell very well, I get the feeling that places like Johnny's take the tamales that didn't sell, put them in the refrigerator, chill them, steam them again the following day, so they get kind of a hide on them, kind of a thick coating. Not good. Portillo's, though, does a hell of a job.
Who knows what this is? Rainbow. Who's had one? All right. So, who can name all the flavors? Okay, who knows what the secret flavor is? The very strange one. You won't find it. Palmer House. The one that looks like strawberries, Palmer House, and it's actually cherries and walnuts. And the owners swear it had nothing to do with the hotel. They just came up with that name themselves. But it's I think it's the most delicious one. But yeah, there you can read all about how this came to be. The short story is about 100 years ago. Mr. Sapp, who was a tool and die maker, decided to open up this ice cream place near all these cemeteries in basically a rural part of Chicago in Beverly. And he knew that the mourners would come back and want something to eat. Some of them wouldn't go to the bars. They would want something for a family. And that's what he started. And here we go. It would have ended if they hadn't expanded to Navy Pier and all the bonos, but now it's got a whole new life. The original rainbow cone. All right, what do we got here?
Deep dish pizza. It's a subject, a pizza with a lot of contention around it. Is it a pizza? Is it a casserole? When Lydia Bastianich was in town to open Italy, I brought up the topic of deep dish pizza with her. And she said, well, we have the same thing in Sicily. We call it sfincione. So my wife and I were just in Sicily, and I saw some sfincione. And really, it's just like what my Italian granny used to call pizza, which is basically like biscuit dough, spread with olive oil and a little salt and oregano. Super simple, good, but not exactly deep dish pizza. Now, where did deep dish pizza originate? Uno's seems like the place where it originated, but who was the originator is the question. Was it Art Sewell?
Ike Sewell, yeah, or Rick Ricardo.
Rick Ricardo. On this one, I'm going with Ricardo.
I'm going with Ricardo. And this is actually stuffed. We need to change this picture because this is stuffed pizza. Yeah.
It's pretty hard to tell. In fact, I have had stuffed pizza a few times. I can never find that top crust.
A lot more cheese, and you can sort of see that top layer. So we're going to change this up, but because Chicago's got probably three main styles: tavern-style, stuffed, and deep dish, but often interchanged. Okay, has anyone ever gone down the highway or been in a south suburb or on the south side and seen Baba's Steak and Lemonade? All right, so we had a reader at Curious City who wanted to know what the heck that was. So he and I and an intern drove around to a million places, just asking everybody behind the glass, what is going on with the whole steak and lemonade thing. We tracked it down to a Jordanian guy, the same guy who said he invented the gym shoe. But he said that
Great
it's actually,
source, Monica.
yes, but he has a patent on the name Steak and Lemonade, and he opened the first one in Country Club Hills. And this lemonade, I think it starts as lemonade, and then they slurpify it so that it's icy, and then they say, "What 3 syrups do you want in it?" So you drink it, and you feel like you're going to get diabetes at that moment. It is the sweetest thing I've ever had. And then they put a nice sort of seasoning on those fries, and then the steak is essentially a Philly without the cheese whiz. But it's very tasty, and all the people who run these places are either Jordanian, Palestinian, or Egyptian at this point. And he says that it comes from a Jordanian lemonade called limonona. And because he kind of gave me the baloney about the gym shoe, I was like, I don't know if I believe you. But then I found a Jordanian donut place, and I believe Morton Grove, that had a limonona. And it was a mint lemonade, very much like this, but without the syrups. And so I think there probably is some sort of connection there. But it's certainly a hearty meal.
This combination of lemonade and a beef sandwich we find with Italian beef as
Right,
well.
you find them across the street.
Mario's right across from Al's,
Or
and
Johnny's.
Johnny's serves Italian lemonade in the stand itself. And Buona Beef, their original location, is right next door to an Italian ice
So
place.
was that an influence? Possibly. Maybe that's in book 2. All right, steak and lemonade. All right. So we're here at the Chicago-style egg roll. Could be Chinese, like the Chinese egg rolls that my family made with peanut butter, but this is a different thing.
It's different because of the ingredients. I mean, egg rolls you find everywhere. These egg rolls have jerk chicken in them, and critically, for a Chicago dish, Italian beef, which works pretty well, actually. Italian beef is soft. It fits right in the egg roll. It's a good combo. And there are places like this all over the west side and south side in Chicago. The one I went to is Three Kings, which was really quite a place. It had a lot of personality.
Chicken, gyro, and steak in them, according to the cute pictures. All right. Who knows? Now, this is going to separate us. Who knows what this is? This weighs a lot. It's served I think the epicenter right now is on 111th Street. Okay, this is called the Steak Supreme, or the Sweet Steak, or the Steak Sweet. So you take ribeye, you griddle it, you chop it up. The guy told me you chop the mess out of it. And then you add some onions, and then you take a steamed hoagie roll, then you put giardiniera, and then you put a bright green relish that also has sweet peppers in it. Then you put American cheese, and then 2 slices of tomato, and you soak the whole thing in mild sauce. David, how long did you wait for your sweet steak?
Carolyn and I waited 90 minutes for ours. Now, we picked the wrong time of day on the wrong day. It was Saturday afternoon, about 2 o'clock. People were off of work. We walked into a room that was probably a fifth the size of this room, maybe smaller. Roof was certainly lower. And there were 24 people. I counted during our 90 minutes there. I didn't have much else to do. Counted how many people were there, and it was consistently 24 people waiting quietly and patiently for their steak sweet or sweet steak sandwich, and which kind of amazed me. And I think it's because it was their thing, and they respected it. It was a product of their neighborhood. They liked it, and they're perfectly willing to spend a half an hour, 90 minutes on a Saturday to have a bite of this item that they may have been eating all their lives.
I was the 5th person in line when Home of the Hoagie opened. I waited. I was lucky. I only had to wait 1 hour for my sandwich. But I couldn't believe everybody was like so patient. Nobody was getting mad. They're like, this is worth it.
And they're chopping the meat. If they just put it through a grinder, they could get it done a lot faster. But they put the care into it to make it the way they always have, which is to chop the meat.
Yeah, there's a lot of love in the sandwich, but don't go if you're in a hurry. Like, eat a meal and then go and wait. One guy was saying, I think I'll just go see half of the Sox game and I'll come back and maybe it'll be ready. Okay, so we know the giardiniera. We told that story because we got 3 minutes before we got to go. Okay, Tavern-style Pizza. You know if you've had that. that was invented so that people would drink more at bars because it became a party snack, a salty
I'd be
party.
curious to know, in this room, there's deep dish, there's tavern-style stuffed. How many people favor the tavern-style pizza? Yeah, that seems about right. Yeah, it's I think the most popular Chicago style of pizza, and a truly Chicago
This
style
could
as
probably
well.
use a little color correction, but anybody know what this is? Pepper and egg, yep.
It's what Italian beef stands were able to serve on Friday in a largely Catholic city like Chicago. 36% of the people in the city still identify as Catholic. So on Fridays, when many would avoid meat, what's an Italian beef stand to do? Well, they had a griddle, they had the peppers, they had the bread. All they had to do is get eggs, and they could make this sandwich.
Anybody know what this double cheeseburger with grilled onions and a pickle? Big Baby. All right. Okay, we got some. We might get some winners here. So I did a story where I tried to find the inventor of the Big Baby and try to find out why it was served at so many Southside places called Nicky's. And I found a guy named Nicky Vallenes who told me the origins. He said Big Baby came out of a woman's idea. And anyway, you read about it in the book. It's actually quite a caper. Okay, shrimp Dijon, very good.
Shrimp Dijon.
Okay.
Breaded steak sandwich.
Too fast. Breaded steak sandwich, riccobanis.
Have people here had a breaded steak sandwich? Oh, I'm sorry. What? Moving ahead.
Bone and pork chop sandwich, also served at Maxwell Places or Jim's Original. Okay. I think, so one of the things we left out, I do a podcast with a woman named Louisa Chu from the Tribune. Louisa Chu, Monica Eng, Chewing, get it? We do the Chewing podcast, and she castigated us. She said, why didn't you include this? Do you guys know what this is? Any Southsiders here? Atomic cake, right? So in the next one, like I did take a picture of it without, without being cut, but then you couldn't see all the layers. So before we have our closing remarks and questions, we want you guys to calculate now how many of you have only had have had 25 of these. Like there are only 5 you haven't had. Okay, we got one hand up here. Okay.
You've had 25?
So like there are only 5 of them on the list that you're like, okay, I haven't had that. Okay, how about 24? Anybody have only 6 on the list that they haven't had? Maybe we should start with, how many have had 10 of these according to your list? We're still working. Okay, so, all right. Come on, more of you must have had 10. Okay, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Oh, we got some people at 16. Okay, 17, 18, 19,
Wow.
20, 21. Do I have a 22? 22. Anybody have had? Okay, so 21 is the winner. All right. And so the winning person gets a prize of a bottle of Malort. Okay, so that was a 21. Were there 20s? Was there some, 20? Okay, 20. The second prize is 2 bottles of Malort.
Sorry, you couldn't be the lucky winner.
All right. Well, we would love to answer any of your questions, and
We have quite a few questions.
Okay, so it looks like we've got them. They were submitted on a through the electronic world.
Yes. There were high-tech texting numbers. So I have to start with this because there were so many questions about it. We have to go to that first. And it is about the contention between ketchup or mustard on the hot dog.
Okay, so the question is like, why don't we eat hot?
Why?
I asked hot dog expert Bruce Craig why we don't eat ketchup on a hot dog, and he said because it would ruin the perfect balance of salty, sweet, spicy, pickly, And what's the third one? Sour that you get. It would obliterate all those. But you know what I realized? Ketchup is actually sort of an amalgamation of all those flavors.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there is good reason for not putting ketchup on a hot dog because of the flavor profile of the hot dog with garlic and so on and onions. But I think it's kind of a Chicago thing, kind of like Malort, which they love. Ketchup on a hot dog is something Chicagoans hate, and it's almost like an in-joke to deride people who put ketchup on a hot dog or forbid people to put ketchup on a hot dog.
All right, so I did ask one mayoral candidate about it, and he said that he would eat ketchup on a hot dog, and he was someone everyone thought would win for mayor. I don't know. It could have been that answer that made him not
There's
win.
a moral there somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone else put a very clever comment. Was Pepto-Bismol also invented in Chicago? That was a good one. I had to say that. Out of the 30 bites, in your opinion, which ones do you think were the most overrated and underrated?
That's a good one. Jeepers.
Well, the breaded steak sandwich was voted best sandwich in the world by USA Today, or a writer at USA Today. A friend of mine, while eating the breaded steak sandwich, said, there were moments when I was absolutely convinced I was eating breaded carpet padding. So, it's a big mouthful. I happen to like it, but I'm going to pull back from the best sandwich in the world. I would say that is overrating.
Yeah, same. I finally had one of those. Did not like it, but I think the pizza puff. I was really surprised how much I liked it because I wondered why do they call it the pizza puff? Well, when you deep fry flour tortilla, it actually separates into kind of flaky layers. It's almost like fine French pastry at a hot dog stand.
Delicious. Okay, this next question, it's talking about if you were to release another addition to your book, are there any significant changes you would make to the text?
Well, we've been getting a few kind of good-hearted complaints from my mother about the shrimp de Dijon recipe because we took the recipe straight from the hotel, and it calls for 12 shrimp and 14 cups of breadcrumbs.
It's the original shrimp de Dijon recipe. I included it for that
Don't
reason.
try it at home.
Yeah, no, it would be like 2 cups of breadcrumbs per shrimp, so imbalanced.
So we would fix that. We'd probably add the atomic cake.
I might leave that. Yeah. I think we could go longer on a lot of these topics because we were trying to write a book. The first chapter I submitted had to be cut by like 50% because they're U of I Press, and I understand their reasoning, and I think it's solid, wanted to keep the book small enough so that it would fit in a purse, a backpack, a glove compartment, and you could just drive around the city and see if that sandwich you wanted to try is nearby and use Google Maps and find it. And as I say, we put names of places you could purchase these foods after the end of every chapter and recipes in about half the chapters.
The Dijon Hotel?
Dijon.
No, what was it? It was the hotel where the Dijon brothers had a restaurant.
Dijon's restaurant, yeah. It was started by 2 Belgian brothers who came to the 1893 Columbian Exposition, and they were making this, and it sold well, so they started a restaurant. World fairs seem to be very fertile grounds for introducing foods, including shrimp Dijon.
All right, what are the most significant unresolved questions in Chicago food history?
I think the gym shoe. The gym shoe is a big one for me. I want to know. I mean, there are some theories that actually maybe a Pakistani gentleman named Jamshed invented it. Peter Engler, who is he's a microbiologist, but also a Southside food historian. He had this great story where he said he was just going from place to place and interviewing so many people about what could possibly be the origin of the gym shoe. And he was interviewing this owner behind bulletproof glass, and suddenly the owner's assistant comes up to him and says, I know where it comes from. And Peter's like, yes, finally, we're going to find out where the gym shoe comes from. And the guy says, it's from the mind. And so it's still a mystery. Obviously, it did come from someone's mind, but that's not what Peter was asking. Yeah.
I would say I mean, deep dish pizza, I am throwing my vote to Rick Ricardo, and that's where Studs Terkel thought the vote should be thrown as well. It's not resolvable. There were many hands in the creation of the deep dish pizza, including Malnati's and the senior Malnati, and Alice May Redmond, who was an African-American chef who was apparently very instrumental in creating the crust for the deep dish pizza. So lots of people were involved. Success really did have many fathers in that case.
But Tim Samuelson told us both that that Studs Terkel said, it was Rick. Rick invented the effing pizza. So I believe Studs.
Another question is, it says a vast majority of these dishes seem to include onions. On your food journey, have you figured out why onions are a commonality between all these dishes that scream Chicago? Or are there any other ingredients where you saw a kind of a repetition?
Yeah, well, I mean, God, I didn't even think of the onion one. But
That's a new one on me. I think maybe because many of these dishes are fried, or like in the case of Polish sausage, filled with fat and fried. The onion the acidity of the onion would help balance that richness, I think. I mean, that's the best. And also, the Chicago hot dog looks beautiful. And one of the reasons it looks so good is there are all those fresh ingredients on top, like the pepper, the tomatoes, the onions. So I think visually, an onion can enhance the look of it.
And some of them are caramelized and some raw. But the other big trend we saw was the pork to beef conversion. So gyros, originally a pork dish in Greece, became beef and lamb here. Pizza puff was originally invented as a pork thing, but now the standard is beef. The hot dog originally had pork in it, but we're all known for our all beef wieners. So it's, and I think because Chicago had so much livestock and so much beef.
Another viewer is asking, where do you find Malort? Can you find it at any liquor store? Do they all carry it? Are there different brands?
It used to be. The first Malort bottle I ever bought was around 2005. I had to go to Uptown to get it, to a liquor store there. It's the only place I could find that had it. Now they have it at Binny's, including those little bottles that we handed out as prizes. They have little 6-packs of Malort. It's at least in Chicago. In fact, I'm sure only in Chicago you can get it at, I'm guessing, just about any liquor store. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Collector's item, Malort.
And I think that is about all the time that we have this evening, but please join me in giving a round of applause.
Could we just say one thing?
Sure.
If this book does anything, we really hope, and what we found, the one sad thing we found doing this was the really deep cultural segregation that's still in this city. Many Southsiders have never had a Kotogawa. Many Northsiders have never had a sweet steak sandwich or a gym shoe. And that just really speaks to just how entrenched in our own sides of the city we can often be. So if we can do anything to get people out of their neighborhood to try the food of your fellow Chicagoans, that will be a huge win for us. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.